So why not make interviews look cinematic? I mean, it's such a cool way to make your work stand out visually, you know? Let me show you a few simple techniques to shoot interviews using lighting setups inspired by movies. In this example, we'll go with a solid setup. Someone talking to the camera with great lighting in a nice looking location. We'll use 2 shots, a wide and a close-up. To keep things interesting, we'll also mix in some B-roll of the person doing their thing. If it's an actor, let them act a little on camera. If it's an artist, maybe we just watch them paint. But the idea is to light and frame everything, so it looks as cool as possible while still feeling natural and real.
Знаешь, поначалу это просто ощущение, как будто внутри тебя что-то живет. Молчит, но вскоре начинает звучать все громче и громче. Он не спрашивает, он просто начинает звучать. А ты либо принимаешь это, либо гниешь изнутри. Спиваешься, скуриваешься, бежишь от этого, но он уже часть тебя. Если это дар, то с проклятием.
Every 4th commercial project I do involves filming someone speaking on camera, like it's an ad, a doc, or a presentation. And I can say that talking heads are super common. And over time, I've developed an approach that's all about staying true to the light sources that actually exist in the scene. Any light I add to the actor or speaker has to feel motivated, like it could really be coming from something in the frame. And that's the philosophy behind this shot. When I was choosing where to place the speaker, I immediately ruled out putting them right in front of a window, too close to a window, or hiding them in some dark corner. Good composition here does most of the heavy lifting. That's why I always recommend shooting in a space with plenty of room. It gives you the flexibility to use wider lenses if you want, but also to try different focal lengths and camera angles without being limited by the space. For this setup, I went with a 40mm Dieselfilm Arles cinema lens for the wide shot. I like how 40mm slightly compresses the background compared to wider lenses. It gives a tighter, more cinematic look. And the best part, at 35 or 40mm, the frame narrows just enough to let you hide lights closer to your subject. Also, notice how I place the actor in the darker part of the frame, between 2 windows. First, this helps avoid blending the subject into a bright background, something I see a lot in other people's work. Too often, the brightest spot in the frame ends up behind the speaker, pulling focus away from them. Sometimes it's even overexposed. The second reason I chose this spot is lighting flexibility. With the windows on both sides, I can motivate light from the left and right, giving me room to build a key and backlight setup that actually makes sense in the scene. I love playing around with sound in post, but sometimes during interviews, even the most beautiful music tracks can feel too epic or overly emotional. They start stealing attention from the actual story, you know. That's why I really appreciate this feature in Audiio.com, AI-powered stem separation. It lets you break a track down by individual instruments, super useful when you need to simplify a moment in your video or loop a section if the track is too short. And honestly, Audiio has a ton of great music that really stands out compared to other platforms. As a filmmaker, I've found so many cinematic style tracks here. If you use my link and the discount code, you can get your first year of Audiio Pro for just $59. That's 70% of full access to all their music, sound effects, and AI tools.
Это не вдохновение, это зависимость.
Let's take a closer look at the lighting setup I used for this shoot. First, the key light. We could have just left the natural light coming from the window, but that would have thrown the speaker's face into shadow. And in interviews, it's important for us to clearly see the emotions and expressions. The subject needs to feel present and visible. That said, it's also important not to overdo the brightness. You want to watch your exposure and keep the added light soft and balanced. For this setup, I used a Nanlite 240C as a side key. It It was placed inside a softbox to create a gentle, diffused light on the face. But take a look outside. It's overcast. So to keep things motivated and realistic, I asked the lighting team to double diffuse the key. We built a frame using a 1/2 light grid, which helped the key match the softness of the cloudy daylight outside. I rarely use just a bare softbox for this kind of lighting, unless I'm doing a backlight or I really need to push the output. For portraits, I almost always prefer bounced or double diffused light. It gives you that cloudy day feel, super soft, natural, and cinematic. Using a large diffusion surface also gives you a nice catchlight in the eyes, which looks great in close-ups. Now, you don't have to use something big. Even a piece of foam board can work. But if you're doing close-ups, you'll need to bring that foam board in pretty close. And then it might be visible in the wide shot. This approach works best if you shoot your wide and close-up separately, using just one camera. Okay, let's talk about the backlight. And it's also motivated, coming from the second window behind the main character. We used a Pavoslim 240cl with a grid, which kept the light control and off the floor. And it gives a nice rim around the shoulders and helps separate the speaker from the background. I used the Audiio Arles 75mm for the close-up. Didn't want to risk shooting wide open. With that kind of focal length, any tiny movement, and you're out of focus. So I stopped down to f4. Just enough to keep both eyes in focus. The final piece of the setup was negative fill. Even though the room was naturally shadowed on the camera side, light still bounced off the walls and acted like unwanted fill. So I blocked that to keep the shadows deep and maintain a contrast ratio around 4:1 or even 8:1, just enough to make the shot feel cinematic and three-dimensional. That's it for this breakdown. For a full exposure walkthrough and more deep dive lessons, check out my training project Modern Cinematography on my website. See you there.